The morning Nora Kesler arrived at Bellamy Hart, every editor on the third floor stopped pretending to work and started pretending not to stare. She walked through the open-plan office like a blade through silk, and I watched her from behind my monitor thinking three things in rapid succession. 1. That coat probably cost more than my rent. 2. She looked like she hadn't slept in a way that made exhaustion seem elegant. And 3. I was going to have a very serious problem. Before we continue, comment below where in the world you are watching from, and please click like and subscribe for more GL stories. I'd heard about her for weeks before she actually showed up. Everyone had. Nora Kesler, the new editorial director, poached from a competing house where she'd gutted the fiction list and rebuilt it into something critics fawned over and accountants actually respected. The rumors painted her in shades of gray and colder. She didn't do small talk. She didn't remember birthdays. She'd once rejected a manuscript mid-pitch by sliding it back across the table without a word, and the agent who told that story still looked shaken recounting it 2 years later. My best friend Daphne, who ran the marketing department with the chaotic energy of someone who genuinely believed spreadsheets were optional, had already formed her opinion. "She's going to fire someone in the first week," Daphne announced, tapping a pen against her teeth. "I can feel it. She's got that energy, like a cat deciding which bird to eat first." "You've never even met her," I pointed out. "I don't need to meet someone to sense their aura, Ren. I have instincts." "Your instincts told you to invest in that essential oils startup. And those oils smelled incredible, so I don't know what point you think you're making." I loved Daphne with my entire chest, but she was wrong about Nora. Not because I had better instincts, but because of what happened 30 minutes after that conversation, when I was standing in the narrow kitchenette, trying to unjam the coffee machine with the handle of a spoon, and Nora walked in. I didn't hear her. That was the first thing I learned about her, that she moved through space, like she was trying not to disturb it. 1 second I was alone, muttering threats at an espresso capsule, and the next there was someone behind me, and when I turned around she was just there, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something woody and warm that didn't match the Ice Queen reputation at all. "Sorry," I blurted, stepping back so fast I hit my hip on the counter. I wasn't. The machine is possessed, I think." She looked at me. And here's the thing about Nora Kesler's face that no one ever mentioned in all those whispered office stories. Her features were precise. Yes, sharp jaw, dark eyes that seemed to be running calculations behind them. But when she looked at me in that kitchenette with coffee grounds on my fingers and probably panic on my face, the corner of her mouth moved. Just the left side, just barely. And it changed everything about her. The way a crack in a wall lets you see there's light on the other side. "The trick is to push the lever down before inserting the capsule," she offered, and her voice was lower than I'd expected, with a roughness around the edges like she'd been up reading all night. "They jam less if you reset the mechanism first." "You know about coffee machines?" "I know about machines that refuse to cooperate. I find them relatable." And then she smiled. Actually smiled. Small and quick, and slightly crooked, and it landed in my sternum like a dart. I stood there, holding a spoon like an idiot, while she reached past me, her sleeve brushing my arm as she reset the lever, dropped in a capsule, and pressed the button. The machine whirred to life immediately, because of course it did. The woman could probably intimidate appliances into compliance. "Thank you," I managed. "Ren Callaway, right? Associate editor, literary fiction?" That's me." She picked up the cup, handed it to me instead of keeping it for herself, and walked out without another word. I stood in the kitchenette for a full minute after she left, holding coffee I hadn't made, trying to understand why my hands were shaking. The thing was, nobody else got that. I realized it slowly over the next few days, then all at once. In editorial meetings, Nora sat at the head of the long table and listened with a stillness that made people trip over their own pitches. Her face gave nothing. She didn't nod encouragingly, Didn't offer the little verbal cushions that soften professional conversation, the interesting, and tell me more that grease the wheels. She asked questions that were so precise they felt like scalpels, and when someone gave a vague answer, she let the silence sit there until they either clarified or wished they'd called in sick. Theo, from nonfiction, called her terrifying. Harriet from Contracts said she was the most efficient person she'd ever met, which from Harriet wasn't a compliment. The junior editors had already developed a warning system, a group chat called Kesler Watch, that tracked her movements through the building so people could avoid being caught unprepared. But in the kitchenette, when it was just us, she smiled at me. In the hallway, when we passed each other and I was carrying too many manuscripts and probably had ink on my face, she smiled at me. In meetings, when someone else was presenting and I happened to glance her way, I'd catch it. That left corner micro-expression, there and gone so fast I sometimes wondered if I'd imagined it. I wasn't imagining it. She doesn't smile, Daphne declared one Thursday, dropping into the chair across from my desk with the dramatic flair of someone announcing a natural disaster. I presented the entire spring marketing plan this morning. 45 minutes. There were graphics and projections. I even had a pie chart, Ren, and you know how I feel about pie charts. You think they're reductive? They are reductive, but I made one anyway because I thought it might humanize the data, and she just sat there. Not a twitch, not a nod. She asked me 3 questions that I'm still not sure I answered correctly, and then she thanked me and moved on. The woman is made of marble. I bit the inside of my cheek and said nothing about the smile I'd gotten that morning when I'd held the elevator door for her. Nothing about the way she'd leaned against the inside wall and looked at me like I was the only restful thing in her entire day. Maybe she's just reserved, I offered weakly. Reserved is forgetting to laugh at a joke. That woman is permafrost. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't explain why I disagreed without explaining what I'd been noticing, and I wasn't ready to do that. Partly because I didn't understand it myself. Partly because the warm, spreading feeling I got every time Nora Kesler's face softened in my direction was becoming harder to file under professional curiosity, and easier to file under, oh no. The first time we were alone for more than 2 minutes was 3 weeks into her tenure, on a Tuesday evening when most of the office had emptied out. I was in the small conference room they let me use as a reading space, surrounded by manuscript pages and sticky notes, and the remnants of a sandwich I'd forgotten to finish at lunch. The window behind me showed the city going amber and violet, and I was so deep in a debut novel about a lighthouse keeper that I didn't notice the door open. "You're still here." I looked up, and Nora was standing in the doorway, her coat over one arm, her bag on her shoulder. She looked different in the evening light, softer somehow, like the sharp edges of her professional armor dulled when there was no one left to perform for. Her dark hair was down, which I'd never seen before. It fell past her shoulders in waves that looked like they'd been pinned up all day and were relieved to be free. "I'm always here," I admitted. "I lose track of time when I'm reading." "What is it?" I held up the manuscript. "Debut. The writing is gorgeous, but the structure needs work. The first 200 pages are perfect, and then it falls apart like the author got scared of their own ending." She stepped into the room, set her bag on the table, and sat down across from me without being invited. Scared of their own ending how? Like they wrote themselves into something honest, and then panicked and wrapped it up too neatly. The whole book is about chaos and imperfection, and then suddenly in the last 50 pages, everything resolves like a math problem. It feels like a betrayal of the voice. She was watching me, with an expression I couldn't read, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes darker in the fading light. "You care about this." "Of course I care about this." I didn't mean it as an accusation. I meant it as an observation. "You talk about manuscripts the way some people talk about people they love." My mouth went dry. I set the pages down and tried to think of something intelligent to say, but she was looking at me like she was reading a manuscript herself, studying the structure, checking for cracks, and finding something she didn't expect. "Have you eaten dinner?" she asked, which was absolutely not the question I was prepared for. I had half a sandwich around too. That's not dinner. That's evidence of intent to eat. Come on, there's a Thai place around the corner that stays open late. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse about deadlines or laundry or the 3 episodes of a show I'd been meaning to catch up on. Instead, I gathered my things with hands that trembled slightly and followed Nora Kesler out of the building and into the cool evening air. The Thai place was small and warm and smelled like lemongrass and chili, and we sat in a corner booth where the light was low and golden. Nora ordered without looking at the menu, which told me she'd been here before. Probably alone, probably late at night when the office had emptied and she had nowhere else to be. The thought made something in my chest ache in a way I wasn't ready to examine. "Can I ask you something?" I ventured, after the food arrived, and I'd spent 5 minutes trying to use chopsticks with the coordination of someone whose fine motor skills had apparently left for the evening. "You can ask? I reserve the right not to answer. Why does everyone think you're cold?" She paused with her glass halfway to her mouth, and I watched something flicker behind her eyes. Not hurt, exactly. More like recognition, the look of someone who's heard a question before and decided long ago how much of the truth to share. "Because I don't perform warmth," she answered carefully. "I don't laugh at things that aren't funny. I don't pretend to find small talk interesting when I'd rather be working. I don't smile unless I mean it." She took a sip and set the glass down with a precision that felt deliberate, like every movement she made was a choice. People mistake control for coldness. It's easier than considering the possibility that someone is just being honest. That sounds lonely. The words left my mouth before I could filter them, and I immediately wanted to reach across the table and stuff them back in. But Nora didn't flinch. She looked at me with that same unreadable expression from the conference room, the one that made me feel like I was being seen in a way I hadn't consented to but couldn't resist. "It can be," she agreed quietly, and then, after a beat, "less so recently." I didn't ask what she meant by that. I was too afraid of the answer, or maybe too afraid that I already knew it. We walked back to the train station together, and when our shoulders bumped on the narrow sidewalk, neither of us moved apart. The night air smelled like rain and exhaust and the last traces of someone's cigarette, and I was aware of every inch of space between us, like it was a living thing with its own pulse. "Ren. Yeah? You have ink on your chin." I swiped at my face, and she laughed. Not a smile, not a polite exhale, but an actual laugh, low and startled, like it had escaped before she could catch it. I'd never heard her laugh before. Nobody at Bellamy Hart had ever heard Nora Kesler laugh, and standing on that sidewalk with ink on my chin, and my heart doing something medically concerning, I understood with terrible clarity that I was in trouble. The trouble deepened in increments. A series of small disasters that individually meant nothing, and collectively meant everything. She started appearing in my doorway, not with assignments or questions, though she always had a professional excuse ready if anyone happened to walk by. She'd lean against the frame and ask what I was reading, or whether the debut novel had gotten any better, or what I thought about a book she'd read over the weekend that she couldn't stop thinking about. These conversations lasted 5 minutes sometimes, and 30 minutes other times, and I began structuring my afternoons around the possibility of them. I noticed things about her that I had no business noticing. How she rolled her sleeves to her elbows when she was thinking hard, revealing forearms that were lean and lightly freckled. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear but never her right. Her handwriting slanted forward like it was in a hurry, every letter sharp and certain, and her voice dropped half a register when she was tired, which was almost always by 4 in the afternoon, and how that lower register did something to my nervous system that I was choosing not to name. "You're staring at her again," Daphne observed, appearing beside me in the hallway, like a surveillance drone with a coffee addiction. We were standing near the copy room, watching through the glass wall of the main conference room, where Nora was leading a meeting about the fall catalog. She was standing, which she did when she was passionate about something, and her hands were moving as she spoke, which I'd noticed she only did when she forgot to be controlled. I wasn't staring. Ren, your mouth was slightly open. You were staring. I was observing. Professionally. She's my boss. She's everyone's boss, and nobody else observes her the way you do. Do you want to tell me what's happening, or should I keep drawing my own conclusions? What conclusions? Daphne looked at me with an expression of such magnificent patience that I felt like a child being gently walked through a math problem. Honey, sweetie, light of my professional life, you are developing feelings for the Ice Queen, and if you think I haven't noticed, you're the worst editor in the building because your own subtext is completely transparent. I opened my mouth to deny it and nothing came out. Because she was right, of course she was right. Daphne was wrong about essential oils and pie charts and the appropriate number of exclamation points in a marketing email, but about people, about me, she was never wrong. I don't know what's happening, I whispered, and it came out sounding more desperate than I intended. She smiles at me, Daph. Only at me. Everyone says she's cold, and I keep wanting to tell them they're wrong, but I can't explain why I know that without, without admitting that you're falling for her. I'm not falling. I've already fallen. I'm lying at the bottom of the canyon looking up and wondering how I got here. Daphne reached over and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I've been watching her watch you in meetings. The marble cracks, babe. Only when she's looking at you, but it cracks. I carried that observation around for days, like a grenade with the pin half pulled. The next escalation happened at the company's autumn launch party, held at a rooftop venue downtown, where the publishing industry gathered to drink free wine and pretend they'd all read each other's books. I wore a green dress that Daphne had picked out, insisting it did something architectural with my collarbones, and I spent the first hour making small talk with agents and reviewers, while scanning every new arrival with a focus that bordered on pathological. Nora arrived late, because of course she did. She came through the rooftop door in a black blazer over a white blouse, her hair down again, and the ambient noise of the party seemed to dip for a second, like the room itself was taking notice. She spoke to a group of senior editors, shook hands with a literary agent who looked slightly terrified, and moved through the crowd with that same blade-through silk quality that left no ripple. I was standing by the railing, looking out over the city, when she found me. I felt her before I saw her, a shift in the air pressure, the woody scent of her perfume arriving half a second before her voice. You're avoiding the party. I'm attending the party from a strategic distance. She came to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm near mine, but not quite touching. The city spread out below us in amber and white, and the breeze carried the faint sound of traffic and someone's music from a distant apartment. You look nice tonight, she offered, and there was something careful about the way she said it, like she'd weighed the words before releasing them and still wasn't sure they were safe. Thank you. You look terrifying, as usual. That startled laugh again, the one nobody else got. Is that a compliment? From me, absolutely. She turned to face me, leaning one elbow on the railing, and the rooftop lights caught the angle of her jaw and the dark gleam of her eyes. Why does it feel different when you say things like that? My heart was doing something acrobatic and inadvisable. Different how? Different as in, I actually believe you. Different as in you're the only person in that entire building who talks to me like I'm a person instead of a position. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had that late afternoon register, low and rough and honest. Different as in, I keep finding excuses to be wherever you are, and I'm running out of professional justifications. The air between us contracted. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my throat, behind my eyes. She was standing so close that I could see the faint line between her brows that appeared when she was being serious, and every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to step back, to laugh it off, to say something deflecting and safe. Because this woman was my boss, and my colleague, and the most professionally intimidating person I'd ever met, and also the most beautiful, and also the only one who made the world feel like it had a second layer of meaning that I'd been missing my entire life, until she walked into a kitchenette and fixed a coffee machine and handed me the cup. Nora, I breathed, and even just her name in my mouth felt dangerous, felt like holding a lit match too close to something flammable. I know, she whispered back. I know. Someone inside dropped a glass, and the sound broke the moment like a stone through a window. We both stepped back. She straightened her blazer. I gripped the railing, and we returned to the party separately, moving through the crowd without looking at each other, pretending that the last 3 minutes hadn't rearranged something fundamental in both of us. But they had, and we both knew it. The Monday after the party, Nora was different. Not cold, exactly, but careful in a way that felt like a door being eased shut. She didn't appear in my doorway. She didn't linger in the kitchenette. In the editorial meeting, she addressed me with the same clinical precision she used for everyone else, and the absence of that left corner smile felt like a weather change, like walking outside expecting sun and finding overcast. I told myself it was fine. Told myself she was being professional, convinced myself that whatever had passed between us on that rooftop had been the wine talking, or the night air, or the temporary insanity that rooftop parties seemed specifically designed to induce. But my body didn't believe any of those explanations, and every time I passed her office and the door was closed, I felt a physical ache behind my ribs that no amount of rationalizing could reach. 3 days of this, and I was starting to spiral. I read manuscripts without absorbing them. I wrote editorial notes that I had to delete and rewrite because they kept drifting off topic into observations about restraint and longing and characters who were too afraid of their own feelings to act on them, which was so embarrassingly on the nose that I wanted to throw my laptop into the river. On Thursday, I was in the archive room on the ground floor, pulling backlist contracts for a rights meeting, when the door opened and Nora stepped in. The archive room was small and windowless, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed at a frequency that always made my teeth itch, and it was absolutely not a place anyone came voluntarily. "We need to talk," she announced, and even in the unflattering light she looked devastating. Her composure cracked just enough at the edges for me to see the effort it was costing her. "Okay? What happened at the party can't happen again." Nothing happened at the party. Ren, my name in her mouth, a warning and a plea wrapped in 2 syllables. "You know that's not true." I set down the files and leaned against the shelf behind me, crossing my arms like that would somehow protect my internal organs from the damage her proximity was doing. "Then tell me what happened, since you seem to have a clearer read on it than I do." "I was honest with you. More honest than I should have been, and now I can't look at you without thinking about it, and I can't not look at you, and both of those things are a problem when you work 15 feet from my office." "So your solution is to pretend I don't exist?" "My solution is to be appropriate." "Since when is avoiding someone appropriate? Since when is shutting down something you feel because it's inconvenient the grown-up move?" "It's not about inconvenience." Her voice cracked on the word, just slightly, just enough for me to hear the real thing underneath the professional veneer. "It's about the fact that I'm your boss. I hold power over your career. Any relationship between us would be, at best, ethically complicated, and at worst, a thing capable of destroying your reputation and mine. I've thought about this, Ren. I've thought about nothing else for 4 days, and I keep arriving at the same conclusion." "Which is?" She looked at me, and I saw it then, the full weight of what she'd been carrying. Behind the composure and the clinical language and the carefully maintained distance, there was something raw and vast and terrified, and it was the same thing I'd been feeling since she handed me that cup of coffee in the kitchenette, and my world tilted sideways on its axis. "That wanting you doesn't give me the right to have you." The sentence landed in the space between us like something dropped from a great height, and the silence after it was so complete I could hear the fluorescent tubes buzzing, and my own blood in my ears, and the distant sound of someone upstairs laughing at a joke that couldn't possibly be as devastating as what was happening in this room. I wanted to close the distance. I wanted to take her face in my hands and tell her that I didn't care about ethics or optics or the organizational chart, that I was a grown woman who'd been falling for her since the moment she fixed a coffee machine with the easy competence of someone who was used to fixing things that were broken, and that she didn't get to decide for both of us what we could and couldn't feel. But I didn't. Because the look on her face was the look of someone who'd already made her decision and was asking me to respect it, even though it was killing her, and I loved her too much to make it harder. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay?" "I understand. I don't agree, but I understand." She nodded once, precisely, and turned to leave. Her hand was on the door handle when she paused, and without turning around, her voice barely audible, she spoke. "For the record, you're the only person who's made me smile in 2 years." And then she was gone, and I stood in the archive room surrounded by dusty contracts and fluorescent buzzing and the wreckage of something that had barely started but already felt like losing a limb. The weeks that followed were a particular kind of torture that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Nora and I maintained the professional distance she'd requested, and it was killing us both, and everyone could tell something was different even if they couldn't name it. Meetings were colder. The hallways felt wider. Our kitchenette became a place I avoided, because the ghost of that first encounter lingered there like perfume in an empty room. Daphne watched me unravel with the quiet concern of a friend who knows exactly what's wrong, but also knows that saying it out loud will break something fragile. She brought me coffee without being asked, made sure I ate lunch. On the worst days, she sat with me during the long afternoons when the office emptied out, and I stayed late, because going home meant sitting in my apartment with my own thoughts, and my thoughts were all Nora. "She's not happy either," Daphne mentioned one evening, so casually it almost slipped past me. "I had a budget meeting with her today. She looked like someone had stolen the color out of her." "Don't. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying, and I need you to not say it, because I'm barely holding it together, and if you give me hope, I'll do something stupid." Daphne pressed her lips together and nodded, and that was the last time she brought it up. But I saw the way she watched Nora after that, cataloging evidence, building a case she was saving for when I was ready to hear it. The thing about working 15 feet from someone you're in love with, who's decided they can't be with you, is that the distance becomes its own kind of intimacy. I knew her schedule by heart. When she arrived, when she left, when she skipped lunch, when her light stayed on past 9. Even the sound of her heels on the hardwood could distinguish her footsteps from everyone else's, the way you learn to identify a particular bird call in a forest full of noise. She ordered the same salad from the same place every Tuesday, and that she drank her coffee black, except when she was stressed, when she added sugar, and that she'd been adding sugar every day for 3 weeks. Theo, oblivious, cheerful Theo, who noticed nothing and suspected less, invited both of us to his birthday dinner at a restaurant in the village, without realizing he was orchestrating the most emotionally charged seating arrangement in the history of social gatherings. There were 8 of us crowded around a long table, and through some cosmic joke or Daphne's covert maneuvering, I ended up directly across from Nora. She was wearing a navy sweater that I'd never seen before, something soft and slightly oversized that made her look younger and less armored, and she was making conversation with Harriet about contracts with the determined focus of someone who was very aware of exactly where I was sitting and was trying desperately not to look. I lasted 20 minutes before I looked at her and found her already looking at me. The eye contact was maybe 2 seconds, 3 at most, but it contained everything we hadn't been saying for weeks. Every avoided hallway and unstolen glance, and morning where I'd arrived at work, hoping today would be the day she broke her own rule, and knowing it wouldn't be. Her eyes were dark and full, and absolutely wrecked, and mine must have been the same because she looked away first, reaching for her wine with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. Under the table, her knee brushed mine. I felt the contact through 2 layers of fabric like it was bare skin on bare skin, and neither of us moved. For the rest of the dinner, while Theo blew out candles, and Daphne told a story about a marketing disaster that had everyone laughing, Nora's knee stayed pressed against mine in the narrow space beneath the table, and that single point of secret contact felt more intimate than anything I'd ever experienced. Walking out afterward, the group splintered on the sidewalk. Hugs, goodbyes, promises to do this again. Nora hung back, and so did I, and when the others had scattered toward their respective trains and Ubers, we were standing alone on a quiet stretch of sidewalk in the village, the November air sharp against our faces. "This isn't working," I said before I could stop myself. "I know. The distance thing, the professional thing, whatever you want to call it, it's not working for me, and I don't think it's working for you, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of dishonest." She turned to face me, and in the streetlight she looked stripped bare, all the professional armor gone, just a woman standing on a sidewalk in a navy sweater, looking at me like I was the answer to a question she'd been afraid to ask. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "I want you to stop deciding what's best for me. I want you to let me choose this. I want you to trust that I know what I'm getting into, and I'm getting into it anyway, because you're worth every complicated thing that comes with it. You don't know that. I know that you smile at me. Only me. I know that you laugh at my jokes and lean into my doorway and read the same books I love and argue with me about endings like it matters, because to you it does matter. And to me it matters, and we're standing on a sidewalk in November, pretending that this connection is something we can just put away in a drawer and forget about." "Ren," her voice was barely a breath, "I'm terrified." "Good, so am I. Let's be terrified together." She stared at me for a long, impossible moment. The city moved around us, taxis and voices and the distant clatter of a restaurant closing up, and none of it existed, none of it mattered, because Nora Kesler was looking at me like I'd just offered her something she'd given up believing she could have. She didn't kiss me, not yet, but she reached out and took my hand, threading her fingers through mine with a deliberateness that felt like signing a contract, and her hand was cold from the night air, and slightly trembling, and the most solid thing I'd ever held. "Together," she repeated, testing the word. We stood there on the sidewalk, holding hands like teenagers, the wind cutting through our coats, and it wasn't a grand gesture, or a cinematic moment, or anything the listeners of this story might have been waiting for with bated breath. It was small and quiet and shaking and real, and it was the beginning of everything. What nobody tells you about falling in love with someone at work is that the secrecy makes everything louder. Every accidental touch in the elevator became a detonation. Every shared glance across the editorial table carried enough subtext to fill a novel. We weren't together, not publicly, not yet. But the hand-holding on that November sidewalk had unlocked something between us that couldn't be locked again, and the effort of containing it was exhausting in the best possible way. We made rules. Nora insisted on rules, because Nora approached everything, including romance, with the structured intensity of someone who'd been burned before and wasn't about to let the fire spread unchecked. No touching at work, no lingering in each other's offices, and absolutely no sending anything over company email that couldn't be read aloud at a board meeting. Outside work, we could be whatever we were becoming, but inside Bellamy and Hart, we were colleagues and nothing more. These rules lasted approximately 9 days. The first violation was mine. We were in the elevator, just the two of us, descending from the 5th floor archives. She was holding a stack of contracts and talking about a rights dispute with a foreign publisher, and she was so animated about the absurdity of the situation that she didn't notice a page slipping from the top of the pile. I caught it, and when I handed it back, our fingers touched, and instead of letting go, I held on for half a second longer than necessary. Her voice stopped mid-sentence. She looked down at our hands, then up at me, and the expression on her face was a controlled devastation that I wanted to photograph and frame. "That's a violation," she murmured. "Sue me." "I might?" The elevator doors opened, and we stepped out, and Theo was standing right there, oblivious and cheerful, asking Nora about a catalog question. She answered him with the same composure she brought to everything, but I caught the faint flush at the base of her throat, and knowing I'd put it there felt like holding lightning in my fist. The second violation was hers. It was a Wednesday evening, raining hard enough that the windows of the office rattled, and I was the last person on the floor, editing a manuscript that was due for notes in the morning. I'd kicked off my shoes and was sitting cross-legged in my desk chair, chewing a pen, when I heard footsteps I'd recognize anywhere. She appeared in my doorway. Her hair was damp from the rain, which meant she'd gone out and come back, and she was holding 2 containers of food from the Thai place around the corner. "You haven't eaten," she observed, setting one container on my desk. "How do you know?" "Because it's 8:45 and you're chewing a pen, which you only do when you're hungry, and pretending not to be." I stared at her. "You notice what I do when I'm hungry?" "I notice everything you do." "That's the problem." She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Daphne usually occupied, and opened her own container. "Eat. We can pretend this is a working dinner if anyone asks." "Nobody's here to ask." "Then we can pretend it's just dinner." We ate together in my tiny office, with the rain hammering against the windows, and the fluorescent light casting that unflattering buzz over everything. And it should have been ordinary, should have been nothing, 2 colleagues sharing takeout on a late night. But Nora's feet were tucked up under her in the chair, and she'd taken off her blazer, and she was telling me about the book she was reading, a memoir by a war correspondent who'd eventually married the translator she'd worked with for 3 years, and the way her voice went soft when she described the chapter about the translator waiting at the airport made me understand that she was telling me a love story because she couldn't yet say the words about ours. "Nora," I interrupted gently. She looked up from her food. "This is a date." A beat of silence. Then that crooked half-smile, the one that cracked the marble, the one that I'd been living for since the first day she arrived. "Yes," she admitted. "I suppose it is." The dates multiplied. We met at restaurants far enough from the office that running into colleagues was unlikely. One Saturday, we went to a bookshop in the West Village on a Saturday afternoon and spent 3 hours arguing about the ending of a novel we'd both read, standing in the fiction aisle with our voices low and our bodies gradually drifting closer until my shoulder was against hers and neither of us mentioned it. We walked the length of the High Line at sunset, and she told me about growing up in Connecticut with a mother who valued composure above all else, and a father who left when she was 12, and how she'd learned early that showing emotion was a vulnerability she couldn't afford. "So the coldness is armor," I concluded. "The coldness is a habit I've had for so long I forgot it was a choice, until you walked into that kitchenette with coffee grounds on your fingers and looked at me like I was a person, not a position, not a reputation, just a person who was maybe having a bad first week." "You weren't having a bad first week?" "I was having a terrible first week. Everyone was afraid of me, and the woman I'd just met in the kitchenette was kind and funny and had ink on her chin, and I wanted to know her, and wanting to know someone was so unfamiliar that it frightened me more than any board meeting ever has." I reached over and took her hand, and we kept walking, and the city went pink and gold around us like it was showing off. The problem with secrets, though, is that they grow. What starts as a small, contained thing, a held glance, a hidden dinner, expands until it fills every room you're in together. And in an office where gossip traveled faster than email, the growing size of our secret was becoming dangerous. Daphne cornered me in the copy room on a Monday morning, closing the door behind her with the focused determination of someone about to conduct an intervention. "Tell me what's happening with Kesler." "Nothing is happening with Kesler." "Ren, you came in this morning humming. You haven't hummed since that barista in Brooklyn broke up with you. You're humming, you're glowing, and you looked at Nora in the 9 o'clock meeting like she invented sunlight. Tell me what's happening or I'll start guessing, and my guesses will be louder than your truth." I leaned against the copier and pressed my palms over my eyes. We've been seeing each other, outside of work. It's new, and it's careful, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm terrified that it's going to blow up. Daphne was quiet for a moment, which was so uncharacteristic that I dropped my hands to check if she'd left the room. She hadn't. She was standing there with an expression that was equal parts worry and warmth, and when she spoke, her voice was gentler than I'd ever heard it. "How serious?" "I don't sleep on the nights we don't see each other. I reread her texts like they're manuscripts. I think about the way she says my name when I'm supposed to be editing. It's bad, Daph. It's catastrophic. She's my boss, and she's brilliant, and she's the most caring person, hiding behind the most impenetrable exterior I've ever encountered, and I'm in love with her, and I can't tell anyone because if this gets out it'll destroy her. Or it'll destroy you. I don't care about me." "Well, I do, and she should too." Daphne squeezed my arm. "I'm not going to tell you to stop. You're a grown woman, and you've never looked at anyone the way you look at her. Not even Brooklyn barista, and she was exceptional. But you need to be careful. Office politics is a blood sport, and the people who get cut are always the ones with less power." She was right, and the weight of her rightness sat on my shoulders for the rest of the day. The thing Daphne understood, the thing I was trying not to think about, was the power imbalance. Nora could survive our relationship becoming public. She was the editorial director, brilliant and connected and with a track record that spoke for itself. But I was an associate editor, mid-career, ambitious but not yet established enough that my reputation could withstand the whisper campaign that would follow. People would say I'd slept my way up. People would question every manuscript she approved that I'd championed. The narrative would write itself, and I'd be the punchline. Nora knew this too. She brought it up one evening at her apartment. A clean, beautiful space in the Upper West Side that was decorated with the careful restraint of someone who feared mess in all its forms. We were sitting on her couch, my legs across her lap, her fingers tracing absent patterns on my ankle, while we pretended to watch a documentary about architecture. "I've been thinking about us," she began, and the way she said us still sent a current through me every time, because for so long there hadn't been an us, and hearing her claim it felt like finding a door in a wall I'd assumed was solid. "Thinking what kind of thinking?" "The responsible kind." "I hate the responsible kind." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If this comes out the wrong way, you're the one who suffers, not me. You. And I won't let that happen." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we have a plan. Not forever, not an endless secret, but a timeline. I've been approached about a restructuring that would eliminate the direct reporting line between us. If I move the fiction editors under Harriet's oversight instead of mine, we wouldn't have a hierarchical relationship anymore. It would take time to implement. A few months, maybe. But once it's done, we could be open, and nobody could claim I'd compromised my position to benefit yours." I sat up, pulling my legs back, and looked at her face in the lamplight. She'd thought about this. Not in the panicked, middle-of-the-night way I thought about things, but in the careful, structural way she approached every problem, identifying the issue, building the framework, engineering the solution. She wasn't trying to hide me. She was trying to protect me, and she was willing to restructure her own department to do it. "You'd change the entire editorial structure so we can be together?" "I'd change considerably more than that." The devastating lines kept coming, and she delivered them with the same precision she brought to everything, and every time one landed I felt it rearrange something inside me, like tectonic plates shifting to accommodate a new geography. I kissed her then, the first real kiss, on her couch with the documentary murmuring in the background, and the city lights painting her living room in blues and silvers. Her mouth was warm and careful, and then suddenly not careful at all, and her hand came up to the side of my face and held me there like she was afraid I'd disappear, and I could feel her heart hammering through the thin fabric of her sweater, and I understood that the woman everyone called cold had been carrying a wildfire inside her, and I was the only one she'd let close enough to feel its heat. We didn't go further than that. Not yet. Because Nora did everything with intention, and she wasn't going to rush this, and because the waiting had become its own language between us, a charged space where desire lived and grew and made every eventual touch feel like an event. But the world, as it tends to do, didn't wait for our plan to mature. The crisis came on a Friday in early December, in the form of Conrad Wheeler, Bellamy Hart's CEO, and a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. I was in the small room adjacent to the main conference room, gathering materials for a meeting that had just ended, when Conrad's voice carried through the connecting door. He was on the phone, and his tone had that familiar blend of smug and strategic that I'd learned to distrust. Kesler's shaking things up, which is what we brought her in for, but she's gotten close to one of the fiction editors. Callaway, I've heard talk. A pause. No, nothing confirmed, but the optics are a problem. If we need to restructure the fiction team in spring, having a personal relationship in the mix complicates the narrative. We might want to move Callaway to the satellite office, get some distance, make the problem disappear before it becomes a conversation. My blood went cold. I stood perfectly still, holding a stack of papers I no longer felt, listening to the CEO of my company discuss my career as a problem to be managed, my relationship as an inconvenience to be relocated. The satellite office was in New Jersey, 30 miles and a world away from the editorial floor where I'd built my career. It wasn't a firing, but it was an exile, and it would effectively end both my ambitions and my proximity to Nora. I left the room on autopilot, walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the closed lid with my hands shaking. My mind was running scenarios, each worse than the last. Telling Nora meant she'd confront Conrad, and the confrontation would confirm the rumor and accelerate the very outcome we were trying to prevent. Keeping it from her meant carrying a secret that would corrode us from the inside. And if I resigned before they could transfer me, I'd be giving up the career I'd spent 7 years building. There was no clean option. Every path had teeth. I told Nora that evening. I went to her apartment straight from work, still in my coat, still shaking, and I stood in her doorway and repeated what I'd heard word for word, while she listened with a stillness that wasn't cold at all, that was the focused, contained calm of someone processing a threat and already calculating responses. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she took my coat, hung it up, led me to the couch, sat me down, and knelt in front of me, taking both my hands in hers. They're not moving you anywhere. Nora, if you fight this, it confirms everything. Then let it be confirmed. I'm done hiding. You said we needed a plan. You said the restructuring would take months. Plans change when someone threatens the person I love. There it was. The word neither of us had spoken yet, dropped into the conversation like a stone into water, and the ripples spread through both of us simultaneously. I watched her face as she realized what she'd let escape. The quick flash of vulnerability, the decision not to take it back, the way her jaw tightened like she was bracing for impact. You love me, I breathed. Inconveniently, recklessly, and completely. Yes. Good. Because I love you too. And I've been waiting for one of us to be brave enough to say it, and apparently it took a corporate threat to get us there, which is both depressing and very on brand for our relationship. She laughed, that low, startled sound, and rested her forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a while, breathing together, her thumbs tracing circles on the backs of my hands, and the fear was still there, prowling at the edges, but it was smaller now, diminished by the act of naming what was between us. We spent the weekend strategizing, and if anyone thinks strategic planning with the woman you love on her living room floor, with takeout containers and legal pads isn't romantic, they've never met Nora Kesler in problem-solving mode. She was magnificent, pulling up company policy, HR guidelines, and industry precedent. Within hours, she'd mapped out the restructuring timeline and identified which elements could be accelerated, then called a lawyer friend on Saturday morning and spent an hour on the phone asking questions about workplace relationship disclosure protocols and the legal thresholds for retaliatory transfers. By Sunday evening, we had a plan that was decidedly Nora, clean, precise, and slightly ruthless. Monday morning, Nora walked into Conrad Wheeler's office at 8:15, before the rest of the floor had even arrived, and told him 3 things. 1, that she was in a relationship with an employee. 2, that she'd already initiated the restructuring necessary to eliminate the direct reporting line. And 3, that any attempt to transfer, demote, or marginalize the employee in question would be met with a formal complaint to the board and, if necessary, legal action. I wasn't in the room, but she told me afterward, sitting in the kitchenette where it all started, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. What did he do? He blinked a lot, then he asked who the employee was, then he blinked some more. And I told him that the restructuring memo would be on his desk by end of week, and that the fiction editors would report to Harriet effective the 1st of January, and that my relationship wasn't a problem to be managed, but a fact to be accommodated. He agreed. Reluctantly, but he agreed. Just like that? Just like that. I think he was expecting me to be ashamed, and when I wasn't, he didn't have a script for it. I looked at this woman, this supposedly cold, marble-carved woman who'd just walked into the CEO's office, and refused to let the world make her apologize for loving me, and I felt something crack open in my chest that was bigger than gratitude, bigger than relief, bigger than any single word I had for it. You didn't have to do that. She tilted her head, and that crooked smile appeared, the one that had started everything. Yes, I did. You're worth the disruption. The office found out gradually, then all at once. The restructuring memo went out on Wednesday, and while it was worded in the dry, bloodless language of corporate communication, people noticed. People noticed that fiction now reported to Harriet. They saw that Nora's door was open more often, and everyone could see I wasn't avoiding the kitchenette anymore. Theo figured it out first, because Theo, despite appearing to notice nothing, apparently noticed everything and just chose when to reveal it. He found me in the copy room on a Thursday afternoon and leaned against the doorway with his arms crossed. So, you and Kesler, I don't know what you're talking about. Ren, I've watched you stare at her for 3 months. I'm oblivious, not blind. Congratulations. She's terrifying and brilliant, and she smiles at you like you invented oxygen. I approve. Thank you, Theo. Also, you owe me, because I sat across from you at my birthday dinner, while you two did whatever you were doing under the table with your knees, and I pretended not to notice, and that level of discretion deserves recognition. I stared at him. You knew at the birthday dinner? I've known since the launch party, Ren. The rooftop? You both came back inside looking like you'd seen God. It wasn't subtle. I made a mental note to never again underestimate oblivious, cheerful Theo. Daphne's reaction was less understated. She showed up at my desk with 2 cupcakes, a card that read, "I knew before you did," and a hug so tight it nearly cracked a rib. The Ice Queen melted, she declared, and then immediately corrected herself. No, she didn't melt. She just stopped pretending she wasn't already warm. You saw her, Ren. Before anyone else, you saw her. The public moment, the real one, happened at the company holiday party in mid-December. It was held in the Bellamy Hart lobby, which had been transformed with lights and greenery and tasteful decorations that publishing houses favor, because they want everything to look like it belongs on an indie novel cover. Nora arrived and found me immediately. Not in the old way, the covert strategic drift across the room. She walked straight to where I was standing with Daphne and Theo, and she did something I'd never seen her do in a professional setting. She put her hand on the small of my back. It was such a small gesture. Just her palm, warm and steady, settling against the fabric of my dress in the space between my shoulder blades. But in a room full of colleagues who'd spent months calling her cold, watching her guard every expression and measure every word, that hand on my back was a declaration louder than any speech. It said I'm hers, she's mine, we belong to each other, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Daphne grinned. Theo raised his glass. Harriet, standing nearby, gave a nod of approval that managed to convey 3 months of quietly accumulated understanding. And across the room, Conrad Wheeler saw the hand and the woman attached to it and the woman she was touching, and he looked away, because there was nothing left to manage. The problem he'd tried to disappear had refused to be disappeared, and it was standing in his lobby, alive and claimed and radiantly unbothered. Later that evening, Nora and I stood on the fire escape outside the third-floor conference room, because every critical moment of our relationship seemed to happen at a distance from the crowd, in the margins where the real conversations live. The December air was biting, and our breath came in white clouds, and the sounds of the party leaked through the closed window behind us, like music from another world. You know what I keep thinking about? I rested my elbows on the railing, looking out at the city. What? The coffee machine. That first day, if I hadn't been terrible with Nespresso capsules, you might never have talked to me. She leaned against the railing beside me, close enough that our arms pressed together from shoulder to elbow. I would have found another excuse. I was looking for one from the moment I saw you. You were? You were standing in the third-floor hallway reading a manuscript while walking, and you nearly collided with a filing cabinet, and I thought, she's going to damage company property, and I'm going to care about it more than I should. I laughed, and the sound dissolved into the cold air. I don't remember that. You wouldn't. You were reading. The building could have been on fire and you wouldn't have noticed. She turned to look at me, and the city lights were reflected in her eyes like something impossible. That's what got me. Not your face, though I love your face. Not your voice, though your voice makes me forget how sentences work. It was the way you disappear into things. Books, manuscripts, conversations. You give yourself completely to whatever's in front of you. I've never met anyone who lives inside moments the way you do. And you live outside of them. I did. Before you, I watched life from behind glass, organized and controlled and completely separate from the mess. And then there you were, messy and present and ink-stained and radiant, and you looked at me and saw warmth where everyone else saw winter, and I thought, if I'm not careful, this woman is going to ruin every wall I've ever built. Have I? Thoroughly. I kissed her on the fire escape while the holiday party murmured behind us, and the city shimmered below, and the cold turned our breath to clouds between us. And this time, there was no careful restraint, no deliberate pacing, just her mouth on mine, and my hands in her hair, and the taste of wine, and the feeling that every hard, frightened, careful month had been leading here, to this moment, to this woman, to the unbearable rightness of being chosen by someone who doesn't choose easily. When we pulled apart, her forehead resting against mine, her hand warm on the side of my neck, she whispered something that I've carried with me every day since. You were the first person I wasn't afraid to be warm for. I didn't know what that cost me until I tried to stop, and I couldn't. The months that followed weren't without their complications. Awkward conversations followed with colleagues who'd placed bets on Nora's romantic life, and lost. a deeply uncomfortable meeting with HR that Nora handled with the same crisp efficiency she brought to everything. For a while, certain people in the office treated me differently, watching for signs of favoritism, measuring my work against an impossible standard, looking for evidence that I hadn't earned my place on my own merits. Nora never interfered. She'd built the firewall, the restructured reporting lines, the formal separation between our professional and personal lives. And she trusted it. When my manuscripts were accepted for publication, it was on Harriet's recommendation, and the book succeeded because they were good. And gradually, the whispers faded into background noise, and then into nothing. The moment I knew we'd survived it all came on an ordinary Tuesday in March, 6 months after the restructuring, and 4 months since the holiday party. Nora was in her office with the door open, which had become her default after years of keeping it closed, and I was walking past with a coffee in each hand, and I stopped in her doorway and set one on her desk without a word. She looked up from her reading and smiled. The full version, both corners of her mouth, the one that reached her eyes and softened every sharp line of her face and made her look like the person she'd been before the world taught her that warmth was a weakness. "Thank you," she murmured. "You're welcome." And that was it. No drama, no subtext, no loaded silence, just a woman bringing coffee to the woman she loved, in an office where everyone knew and nobody cared anymore, and the ordinariness of it was the most extraordinary thing I'd ever felt. Daphne found me later that afternoon in the hallway and fell into step beside me with the satisfied air of someone whose predictions had all come true. "You know what I think about?" she mused. "Your essential oils investment?" That the scariest woman in the building turned out to be the softest one. She just needed someone brave enough to stand still while she figured out how to thaw. I didn't do anything brave, I just didn't leave. Ren, staying is the bravest thing anyone can do. On a spring evening, cherry blossoms dropping petals over the sidewalks, and the air smelling like rain and new things, Nora and I walked home together from the office. We did this now, walked home together, because we lived together, because somewhere between the fire escape kiss and the HR meeting and the ordinary Tuesdays, she'd asked me to move in with a characteristically understated proposal that had involved a spare key on her kitchen counter and the words, "The commute would be shorter, and I've cleared half the closet, and I'm asking because I want to wake up next to you every morning for as long as you'll let me." I'd let her. We walked through the park near our apartment, and the trees were ridiculous with blossoms, an excessive beauty that felt like the universe overcompensating for a hard winter. Nora was quiet in the way that meant she was thinking something she hadn't yet figured out how to say, and I'd learned to let those silences be. To give her the space to find the words at her own pace. "My mother called today," she finally offered. And she wants to meet you." She used the word companion, which is her version of screaming approval from the rooftops. "Your mother, who valued composure above all else, wants to meet your messy, ink-stained girlfriend?" I told her about you, how you read while walking, the way you argue about endings, how you saw something in me that I'd spent 20 years covering up, and you stayed anyway. She stopped walking and turned to face me, and the cherry blossoms were drifting around us like the city was staging a romantic movie without our permission. She cried, "Ren, my mother, who hasn't cried since 1998, cried because her daughter, who everyone told her was too cold to love, found someone." I pulled her into my arms, right there in the middle of the park, with petals in her hair and spring in the air, and she held me so tight that I could feel her heartbeat against mine. 2 rhythms syncing up the way they'd been trying to, since the day she walked into a kitchenette and fixed a coffee machine and looked at me like I was worth smiling at. Everyone had said she was cold. Everyone had warned me that Nora Kesler was made of marble and winter, and the kind of professional ruthlessness that left no room for softness. And they weren't wrong about what they saw, because what they saw was the wall she'd built, the armor she'd worn, the careful, controlled exterior of a woman who'd learned too young that showing warmth made you vulnerable. But they never saw what I saw, the crooked half-smile, that startled laugh, a hand that shook when she reached for mine. Her voice dropping to a whisper when she said my name. The woman behind the wall who'd been waiting, this whole time, for someone patient enough to stand at the gate and not knock, not demand entry, just be there, steady and present and unafraid, until she was ready to open it herself. She smiled at me, only me, and I stayed. If this story touched your heart, do the channel a kindness and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that being patient with people who seem cold is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Because behind every wall is a person who built it for a reason, and behind every reason is a heart that just needed to feel safe enough to be seen.